Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Nicholas Paget-Brown, formerly leader of the council. So would you ask Mr. Paget-Brown to come back in, please? Good morning, Mr. Paget-Brown.
Good morning, sir.
All right,
Morning.
all ready to carry on?
Indeed.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning, members of the panel. Good morning, Mr. Paget-Brown. Before I pick up the threads of where we were yesterday, I'd like to revisit one point with you, if I may. Can I ask first, please, for you to be shown TMO 100172554? 100172554. That's the deficiency notice served on the TMO on the 17th of November 2016 in respect of Grenfell Tower. And we looked at that together yesterday at page 201 of the transcript. Can I please have up at the same time, please, if it's possible, and if not, it doesn't matter, day 132, the transcript for yesterday, at page 203. And we can do that. And at page 203, you say, in fact, we probably want the bottom of page 202 as a little bit of a run-up. You say at line 22, at the bottom of page 202, I'm not familiar with this. And question at line 24, are you surprised that you hadn't seen it before or hadn't seen it at the time? And then if we go over to page 203, you say, well, I always received reports where there had been a fire. I'm surprised somebody didn't mention this to me. I have to say, I would have thought it would have been mentioned, and I'd have obviously raised it with Robert Black or with Nicholas Holgate or perhaps with Laura Johnson, but no, I hadn't seen that. But and then your question tails off, your answer tails off. Now, just to be clear, during your time as leader, would you have expected to have been informed about deficiency notices such as this?
No, I wouldn't. I would have expected to have been informed about any significant fire, and I was.
Right.
But not the detail of the follow-up and the notices. No, I didn't receive those.
What about enforcement notices? Does the same apply to those?
Yes, in general terms, I wouldn't have seen enforcement notices. They would have been dealt with elsewhere in the council.
To your knowledge, was there a policy in place dealing with how notices from the LFEPA, such as this deficiency notice or enforcement notices, would be escalated within RBKC?
I don't know that. I would have expected it to have been escalated within the tenant management organisation and the council to have received reports and updates through the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee or the Director of Housing. I wouldn't necessarily have expected it to cross my desk.
You wouldn't?
No.
Right. Can we look at RBK 401655, please? This is the first page of RBKC's fire safety policy, this one dated January 2014, and it's the by-borough corporate fire safety policy for both Hammersmith and Fulham and RBKC, as you can see at the foot of your screen. It's quite a striking first page. Is it something you think you might have seen before?
I think I have seen this in some shape or form. I think maybe when it was produced, I was given a copy and I might have flicked through it, but not very much more than that.
Right. Let's look at page 2, please. It says under Statement of Intention, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, RBKC, and the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham recognise and accept their duty as the responsible person and landlord to provide and maintain a work environment that reasonably protects all relevant persons from risks to them in case of fire. You see that?
Yes.
Were you aware that that was what this document was supposed to do?
Yes, this is about the corporate work environment for council staff officers and what processes are in place were there to be a fire on council property. That's my understanding of the work environment and the work environment.
That's how you understood that, is it?
Yes.
this document, is it?
Yes.
Well, let's just look in a little bit further at it. Can we look at introduction, please, on page 3? It says, this policy sets out the strategic fire safety vision and objectives of elected members and the executive joint management team. It describes the way in which we effectively manage fire safety based upon British Standard Publication PAS 7, Fire Risk Management System Specification. And then there's an organogram with plan, do, check, act underneath it. And you can see that there's a circle in the middle with what that all means. Underneath that it says, at the bottom of your screen, this policy must be brought to the attention of all employees so that they are encouraged to cooperate and communicate any necessary information on fire safety matters throughout the organisation in order to discharge their duties.
Yes.
And then if you look at the next page, page 4, it says under paragraph 2.2, scope of policy. This policy will apply to all premises where the council has a duty as the employer and or as the responsible person, as defined in the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. This policy will also apply to any premises where, by virtue of a contract or tenancy agreement, other parties have duties as the responsible person, but where the council retains landlord responsibilities. A local fire policy for residential housing based on the housing stock risk profile will be put in place by the Housing and Regeneration Department. Now, were you aware that that was, as I've read to you, the scope of the policy?
Well, I'm not sure I knew that particular phrase of responsible person. I would have defined that as meaning the landlord function being the TMO and the council perhaps being the funder of any work that was necessary. And where it says a local fire policy for residential housing based on the housing stock risk profile, that was what I understood had been going on, particularly since Lacanal, with the assessments of medium, high and low risk properties. And yes, the Housing and Regeneration Department was doing that.
As drafted, this scope of policy suggests that it would apply to housing stock managed by the TMO, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Whether as a responsible person or as a landlord, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Whose responsibility was it within RBKC to ensure that the TMO understood and adhered to this policy?
Well, that would be the Director of Housing, the Housing Department, the Cabinet Member for Housing and Regeneration, and they would be keen to ensure that all the fire risk measures, which I think were largely coming on stream after Lacanal, as I hinted yesterday, were being complied with and assessments were being carried out and doors replaced.
Yes.
And I think they were aware of that. And I think the council, as it says here, the responsible person would be expected to negotiate the funding with through the housing revenue account to do those works. And where it clearly was a council property, a work property, the council would have to fund it from its own resources.
And whose responsibility was it to ensure proper scrutiny of the TMO's performance of its role under this policy?
Well, I still think the scrutiny will come from the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee to make sure the TMO was complying with fire risk assessments and fire risk requirements.
And if you look at page 5, please, you can see just below halfway down the screen in front of you on that page, it says the corporate health and safety team will ensure that there are appropriate processes in place to ensure our partner organisations have suitable and sufficient fire safety management systems in place as part of the due diligence procedures, and will develop suitable protocols with partners so as to ensure fire safety compliance is assured. Did you know at the time that that was part of this fire policy, that assurance was part of this policy?
Well, I knew that corporate health and safety would be casting a wide eye over all the council's fire risk management systems, fire safety management systems, as it says there. So that would include the TMO, and I would expect the corporate health and safety team to liaise with the TMO in the normal way and to look at what they were doing to meet all compliance requirements.
And who was it in the corporate health and safety team within RBKC who was obliged to ensure that there were appropriate processes in place as is prescribed there?
Well, I think that would be, and I'd have to sort of go back and look at structures and things, but I think that would be the Director of Environmental Health, who by Borough Director of Environmental Health, Mr. Austin. Right,
not Laura Johnson then?
No, I think Mr. Austin would have liaised with the TMO and probably Laura Johnson and the Housing Department to ensure that those parts of this document for which he was responsible and supposed to be working in partnership were being delivered.
I see.
But this I would have seen as a sort of central environmental health document. I suspect it goes beyond fire risk into other aspects of health and safety, both for employees and premises.
Why was it the corporate health and safety team who was obliged to ensure what is prescribed there, rather than housing or the subordinate parts of the housing department?
Well, I think in the overall structure, the housing department fits into a wider picture. The council, some of which was, by this stage, by or even tri-borough, the three boroughs trying to work together to save costs at in the context of reductions to government grant. The corporate team is sitting centrally looking at what is happening within the town hall, within the housing directorate, perhaps within care homes or within schools, and it needs to be able to liaise effectively with all those different parts of the council. So housing is obviously very important, residential accommodation, but so are schools and so are workplaces for staff, and I suspect somebody sitting at the middle is in a good place to liaise with everybody.
Can we please go to page 13 of this document? Let's look together at paragraph 4.1 on that page. This is under check. And you'll remember check was one of the four central elements in the organogram. And under 4.1, which is entitled Measuring Performance, the third paragraph says, all incidents should be reported using the online system. Incidents should be investigated by the manager. Consideration should be given to any system solutions to avoid future recurrence. Corporate health and safety will investigate serious incidents where enforcing bodies such as the LFEPA are or may be involved. Were you aware of that aspect of this policy?
No, not consciously, but it wouldn't surprise me at all, and it seems quite sensible that they do take a position on any incident that's happened.
Yes. Do you accept, and if you knew at the time, did you know at the time, that it applied to deficiency or enforcement notices against the TMO issued by the LFEPA?
I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me. It seems sensible.
Yeah, right. So the answer is, if you didn't know it, it wouldn't surprise you if it had done.
Yes.
Should it have done?
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure corporate health and safety should know of any incidents where there was a fire or a risk or something had happened, and they should also know about it. So yes, the department concerned, as I say, it could be education, could be housing, could be adult social care. But it's right that somebody centrally is looking at this and looking at notices served and saying, have you done the work, or are we doing the work, and how long have you got to do that work in, and making sure that something's happening. It's a sort of corporate, it's an extra, what do you call it, a long stop, an extra safety net, really.
Yes. Can we then pick up the threads of where we had left off yesterday? And I want to turn it to the question of communication with residents. Now, if we go to your first witness statement, please, at page 8, I'd like to look at paragraph 33. You say there, towards the bottom of your screen, as leader, I met weekly with the town clerk to discuss relevant issues and would also discuss items raised in my, quotes, mailbag, unquotes, or picked up on visits around the borough. The mailbag consisted of any written correspondence, emails or calls to the leader's office over the preceding week and ensured that these were recorded and properly followed up. I regularly asked the town clerk to follow up particular points raised with me with the relevant officer and department. Occasionally, I would raise matters I had picked up at London-wide meetings of council leaders, with the borough's MPs, at central London forward meetings, or with ministers. And in your second witness statement, paragraph 26, page 8, you don't need to go to it, but you refer to your correspondence log, and you produce a summary of entries on the log which relate to Grenfell Tower. Well, we've actually now got that on the screen. I'm grateful. Let's look at the log. RBK 30544425, please. This is the log you produce, 2013 to 17, and meetings with Town Clerk where Grenfell is an issue or relevant. Would your correspondence log have recorded all the complaints that you received in your mailbag during that period, 2013 to 2017?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think where I was copied in a long list, and there were some sort of quite lengthy emails copied to almost every councillor. I'm not sure, unless it was addressed to me directly, I would have logged that because the person to whom it was addressed, I would assume, was dealing with it. And as I say, I compiled this list to help with this inquiry and with this process, but there may be things I've overlooked or missed, or where I was copied but didn't keep it or haven't written it down here. So this is a help, but I wouldn't say it was absolutely 100% watertight.
Yes, I see. Apart from the items in your mailbag, were you aware otherwise that residents of Grenfell Tower had also made complaints to officers of RBKC and other councillors, such as Councillor Lashari, Councillor Atkinson, Councillor Blakeman?
I certainly knew that Councillor Blakeman had received complaints and had been written to and was taking a close interest in the refurbishment and the issues around it, because occasionally we spoke about it. I'm not so sure about Councillor Lashari, and I don't remember Councillor Atkinson raising anything with me. I think it would mostly have been Councillor Blakeman.
Right. You say you occasionally spoke to Councillor Blakeman about Grenfell Tower complaints.
Well, no, but I think rather more broadly, I think I mentioned yesterday, she'd been quite keen to lobby me for making sure that when the tower was refurbished, the nursery was put back, and I think she'd also spoken to me about the boxing club. I think she'd spoken to me about, there were tenant complaints about the work, and I have to say that wouldn't necessarily surprise me. I think anybody who's had any work done at home where you try and remain working while work goes on around you, even if it's a sort of new bathroom or something, it is immensely disruptive. So it didn't surprise me if a ward councillor said, some of my tenants are getting pretty fed up with the dust, the noise, the dirt, the lift not working, whatever it was. And, these would be informal asides, maybe when I met her at something.
Yes. Can we look at your second witness statement at page 8, please? On that page, you can see paragraph 27. You say there, I did become aware of the residents' concerns in relation to the refurbishment works in December 2015. When a petition was presented to the council about the daily living conditions experienced by residents during the works. As outlined in paragraph 51 of my original statement, I was not present at this meeting. I understand that the petition was referred to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee to be discussed at its meeting on 6th of January 2016. Before that date, December 2015, had you heard nothing about the residents' concerns?
Well, I think I mentioned yesterday I had a letter from Mr. Daffan at some point, which was to me, and I think it was about how he made a complaint about the planning department, about something to do with the windows. So I was aware of that. But otherwise, no, I don't think anybody had written to me directly. As I say, I picked up the odd comment, and that wouldn't necessarily have surprised me.
Did you take any action yourself, personally, in relation to the petition that you referred to here?
No, there's a formal process for petitions, and I think the idea is that the petitioners come to the full council meeting, they read out the prayer of their petition, make any points they want to the full council about the issues that they have. They then get an immediate response from the cabinet member responsible, who will try and answer some of the points in the prayer of the petition and deal with points that it raises, and then normally it's referred to a scrutiny committee. The petition is referred to the scrutiny committee so it can be further discussed and debated, and any outcome from that agreed perhaps with the cabinet member. So this struck me as perfectly normal. I wasn't actually there at that council meeting unusually, but I understood that's what happened. And
did the concerns raised by the residents in the petition lead you to question the efficacy of the TMO's complaints procedure?
Well, I did wonder, and perhaps I've wondered this since the fire rather than before, but when you are doing a massive refurbishment, which is immensely disruptive to people, is it right that you have the same complaints procedure as you would have, say, if your hot water suddenly stopped working or the handle of your window had come off? Is the complaints procedure that runs in the normal routine day-to-day concern of managing nearly 9,000 properties the same as the sort of complaints you get when people are thoroughly frustrated when you're working all around them and their homes are being disrupted? So I wonder whether the complaints procedure for a big project like Grenfell perhaps ought to be ring-fenced. And I thought actually it was, and that tenants could go and talk to the construction company and talk to Rydens and talk to the TMO about problems they were having. And that seemed to me, I think trying to elide the existing complaint system with that perhaps isn't quite right. I mean, you can count the complaints, but it doesn't help you deal with them.
No, you said you weren't sure whether that was a thought you had at the time or after the fire.
I think I've had it after the fire that actually when you're any big project, not just Grenfell, any big project is immensely disruptive to people that live around it or have to live within it while it's going on, and you perhaps need a different complaints procedure, or you need to have somebody who can go and talk to the site foreman or whatever and say, you know, why has the lift been out of action all afternoon, or why is there dust all over my carpet, whatever. And that's slightly different from the day-to-day routine complaints that any property manager is likely to get.
Right. But you don't remember at the time thinking that there ought to be a change in structure such as to enable complaints in relation to refurbishments to be channelled separately and differently from those complaints relating to day-to-day experiences?
No, I don't think I did think that at the time. I think I've thought it since.
Now, I'd like to ask you some questions about your interaction with the Grenfell Action Group, or GAG, and Mr. Daffan. On page 2 of your documents log, if we can please go back to that, RBK 3054425, you can see that on page 2 you note a meeting on the 7th of July 2015.
Sorry.
You see that?
Sorry, whereabouts?
It's
what's the
about
date?
halfway down your screen, 7th of July 2015, meeting with West London citizens.
Oh, yes.
And it says, meeting with West London citizens on housing at Kensington Aldridge Academy, over 100 people attended, RFM and NPB, talked about a regeneration charter and consultation, E. Daffan present and harangued NPB before the meeting about social cleansing, no reference to GT. First, just to be clear, and building on what you said this morning, this document is a document you put together after the fire.
Yes.
Did you put it together in preparation to assist the inquiry?
Yes.
Right. The text that I've just read to you for the meeting on the 7th of July 2015, did that come straight from your memory, or did you refresh your memory from a document?
I would have refreshed my memory when I was compiling this from my weekly calendars, which were produced for me by my office when I was leader, and they set out what I'd be doing the following week, meetings I'd been having, and clearly I looked through those to see what I had been doing, and this meeting was quite an important meeting because it was what we were trying to do, Councillor Fielding Mellon and I, was to talk to residents who might be affected by long-term council regeneration plans, and I wanted to be able to speak to them directly, and West London citizens were brokering this sort of interaction between the council or council members and members of the public, residents living in our blocks, and it seemed to me that was a good way of speaking to them on neutral ground, chaired by West London citizens, and Rock and I could give a short presentation as to what we were doing, answer any questions, and deal with some of the sort of mythology that's around refurbishment of council property.
Yes, sorry, forgive me. My question is a slightly more functional one.
Sorry.
What was it, or what were you looking at, if anything?
My diary.
Yes. Did your diary contain the data, the details of the facts we have here? For example, over 100 people attended.
No, but I recall that it was a very, very crowded meeting. There were at least 100 people there.
And is everything else in this text here something that you recall unaided by a contemporaneous document?
Yes, this is my note. This is my note, my words.
Your note, your words, but just to be absolutely clear, it comes straight from your recollection rather than a recollection refreshed by looking again at a contemporaneous document.
No, the Eddie document would have been my weekly calendar, and I would have looked at it and saw the date, and that would have jogged my memory. It wasn't so.
Right, and your calendar would not have said, and I take it, E. Defan present and harangued MPB before the meeting about social cleansing.
No, I added that.
You added that?
Yes.
And did you add that because that's how you recall it?
Yeah, yes.
When you say E. Defan present and harangued MPB before the meeting about social cleansing, what do you recall of that?
Well, the meeting was held at the Kensington Aldridge Academy, and I arrived, and I was quite keen to sort of go in a few minutes early and just talk to residents who were there. I always think that might be a good opportunity. And Edward Daffan was in the hallway and sort of stopped me, and as always, the conversation became quite pointed and heated. He was telling me, this was the council planning to socially cleanse the north of residents, and this was our plan to destroy the neighbourhood. And I thought, I'm wasting a lot of time going over this with somebody who is determined to misrepresent what we're doing, and I'd really rather be in the room talking to people who actually might like to know what the council is planning to do.
You put no reference to GT. Is that a recollection of what of the content of what Mr. Daffan said?
No, that doesn't refer to Mr. Daffan. It just means there was a meeting with 100 or more people present, and they were asking all sorts of questions about what the council was doing, but nobody put their hand up and said, we've got concerns about Grenfell Tower or anything like that. So,
in this meeting or pre-meeting or encounter, perhaps is a better word, with Mr. Daffan before this meeting, were any questions relating to Grenfell Tower specifically referred to by either of you?
that I don't remember, but I don't think it was if he did raise anything, it wasn't the main thrust. The main thrust was the social cleansing that we were apparently planning to do.
Did you have any interaction with the residents groups associated with Grenfell Tower, either at this time or before that?
No, only no, I don't think I did. Only as I said, I think at the top of this document, I had a very early meeting with Mr. Daffan in the finger blocks, the rest of the Lancaster West estate outside Grenfell Tower, to discuss the conditions there. And that was an early meeting with Mr. Daffan and one or two other residents of the Lancaster West finger block estates. But I don't think anybody particularly raised Grenfell, other than I think at that point the work hadn't started and people were getting concerned that it hadn't started.
Right. Well, we'll come to that very shortly. But this early meeting, would that have been, well, can you give a year at least for that?
I think it was soon after I became leader. I think he wrote to me and asked if I'd go and see him, and I did. And I think that was 2013.
Yes. Well, let's look at the correspondence between Mr. Daffan and RBKC during the summer of that year. Can we start with RBK 403722, please? Now, this is email correspondence between Mr. Daffan and Councillor Rock Fielding Mellon and others on the 27th and 28th of June 2013. What you've got on your screen is later in the year, so we need to start at the beginning on page 11. We will come back to page 1 as we track through this. On page 11, we can see how it starts. In fact, we need to go to page 12, in reality, where Mr. Daffan writes to Councillor Fielding Mellon on behalf of the Grenfell Action Group, the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association, and the Lancaster West Residents Association. to request an urgent meeting to discuss with you the reasons for the delays to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project. We seek this meeting with you in your capacity as Cabinet Member for Housing, Property and Regeneration, as we feel we are unable to get the answers to the questions we want to ask elsewhere. You should be aware that there is growing dissatisfaction among residents of Grenfell Tower and the wider estate that the original promises made to our community appear to have been broken, and we are now seeking clarification about when and with how much available funding will the refurbishment of our homes be taking place. We can see that on page 11, Rockfielding Mellon writes back to him on the next day. And he says, I think it would be useful to have such a meeting and to discuss these various issues. I've CC'd Kerry Thomas, who'll liaise with you to arrange a convenient time for this meeting. Kerry, please also try to make sure Peter Madison and Laura Johnson can attend. Mr. Daffan, can you please confirm who'll be attending from your side? And then he says at the top of page 12, I'd also like to come on a tour of the estate with you. However, I must make it clear that the council has no plans to do anything that could even vaguely be referred to as social cleansing, and I'd urge you to make that clear to your fellow residents. And that was a response to one of the points made lower down on page 12 in Mr. Daffan's original email. And then if we go to page 7 of the email thread, we can see that on the 22nd of July, 2013, Leslie Coyle writes to Mr. Daffan and says, I'm getting in touch at the request of Councillor Paget-Brown and further to your email exchange with Kerry Thomas below, which I've skipped over. Councillor Paget-Brown is agreeable to your request to meet and would like to arrange something before the end of July. There's availability in the diary on Wednesday and Thursday afternoon this week at 2:30 p.m. Councillor Barbara Campbell will accompany the leader on his visit with you. Would you be kind enough to let me know if either of these time slots might be convenient to you, for you? And then if you scroll up, we can see that, in fact, what happens, cutting a long story of diaries short, the meeting is eventually set up for the 11th of September. And if we go up to page 3, we see, after the toing and froing about the date, an email from Mr. Daffan to Leslie Coyle in the middle of that page, middle of your screen now, where he says this: Dear Leslie, thank you for bearing with me while I spoke to other stakeholders with regards to Nick Paget-Brown's visit to Lancaster West Estate. Further to your email, we would like to invite the leader to meet with us on the estate at 3:30 p.m. on the afternoon of 11th of September. Tunde from the leaseholders, Christine from the RA and myself from GAG will definitely be in attendance, and I shall advise you if we will be joined by any others. I will try and send an agenda prior to the meeting, but if this is not possible, we basically want to talk about the managed decline of Lancaster West and how the council can allow us to live in near slum-like conditions while spending £30 million on paving stones for Exhibition Road and indulging in the £1 million subsidy of Opera in Holland Park. We would wish to talk about how we are treated by our landlord, the TMO, and also about the future threat of social cleansing to our community. I'll be back in touch nearer the time to help finalise arrangements. And then we scroll up to another email of the 9th of September, bottom of page 1, over onto page 2, where Mr. Daffan writes again, Dear Leslie, just to confirm our meeting with the leader of the council on Wednesday, 11th September at 3:30 p.m. In order to keep the meeting as focused as possible, we've restricted the number of local stakeholders attending the meeting to Tunde Awaderu from the Lancaster West leaseholders, Christine Richer from the Lancaster West Residents Association, and myself from Grenfell Action Group. We would offer to meet with Councillor Paget-Brown in the RA rooms, etc. And then says, we will wish to discuss the following matters. Why are the council overseeing and controlling the managed decline of Lancaster West Estate through the total lack of investment or care in our community? Why should we be forced to live in slum-like conditions in the richest borough in the UK, where there is £30 million to spare to spend on paving stones in Exhibition Road, but no money for essential housing needs in the north of the borough? Why have the council developed a fascist decant policy that will lead to the social cleansing of our community once the inevitability of regeneration takes place? Why have the council removed the guarantee to rehouse residents back into their communities as stated in the borough's core strategy? And that was originally included in the draft decant policy, but was removed from the final decant policy. Why have the council and its scrutiny committee been involved in a cover-up by totally ignoring the extreme fire risk and danger to resident safety as a result of power surges that occurred in Grenfell Tower in May? How can the council TMO justify the decision to deny liability for the destruction of residents' electrical appliances and refuse to pay us compensation? Why are the residents being treated like dirt through no fault of their own? When the Grenfell Tower improvement project has been delayed for over 1 year now, and why residents will now have to undergo 3 years of disruption instead of having all the construction work taking place at one time? How the funding gap will be bridged between the £11 million Leadbitter have stated the works will cost and the £9.6 million so far available. A commitment from Councillor Paget-Brown that he will take a personal interest in this project to make sure ongoing delays are resolved. And then in the next paragraph, in the second sentence, please can Councillor Paget-Brown give our community a guarantee that the council will do all they can to help the EMB become a functioning organisation again with the ability to hold the TMO properly to account. And then there are other matters as well underneath that. Now, I've read that at length to you. Was that the first, well, first of all, did you see this email? It went to Leslie Coyle.
Yes, I did.
Assuming you did.
Yes.
Was that the first time that all these questions had been raised with you?
Yes, I think so. I think I'd had some dealings with Mr. Daffan previously over the power surges, which happened very much as I was just taking over from my predecessor as leader. But this is the first time I'd seen all these issues laid out, and it won't surprise you to know I thought there were a number of misconceptions and misunderstandings in the letter, and I thought it'd be good to go and meet Mr. Daffan and his colleagues to try to put their mind at rest.
Right. Did you normally give personal access to individual residents in the way that you're offering here?
Well, I was very recently leader. I'd only just become leader, and I'd said to the office that I'd quite like to meet as many residents as possible, and there was no reason why I shouldn't meet Mr. Daffan. And here was a letter full of, accusations which I thought were wildly inaccurate, and but there may be something I needed to know. I was quite keen to go actually and have a look at Lancaster West because I hadn't been there since I'd been the chairman of housing some 20 years before. So it was an opportunity to do that, to meet some other residents. I did know the estate management board was failing, but actually the role of the estate management board, if you like, is a smaller TMO. It was a mini TMO just for Lancaster West, and it seemed to have been failing for some time, and I thought we could perhaps have a discussion about that. I also wanted to know whether there might be an opportunity for Mr. Daffan or anybody else in the finger blocks on Lancaster West to talk to residents about the long-term regeneration opportunities of the estate, and perhaps should we be refurbishing the flats if they were slums, and I wanted to see if they were, or should we be demolishing the estate and rebuilding it in a different way, perhaps in a better way? And I thought we could have a discussion about that, and maybe he could go and talk to some residents and perhaps do a survey, and that would all help in our, we were very new at this, and we were planning some quite extensive regeneration.
Now, in fact, it's right that the meeting did go ahead, didn't it? On
Yes.
the 11th of September, as
Yes.
eventually diarised.
Yes.
Do you accept that from that time, at least, 11th September 2013, you were aware that there was dissatisfaction, if I can use a neutral word, from among the residents or some of the residents of Grenfell Tower with the project and with living conditions generally?
Well, I didn't quite read it like that. I think I've indicated I can understand why people were concerned that Grenfell hadn't started and Mr. Daffan was a leaseholder within the tower, but this was a meeting I had sort of, in my mind, seen as discussing what happens with, Grenfell is going ahead. Okay, it hasn't started yet, but it will start soon. We've got these 3 finger blocks. We've got a failing estate management board. We've got it would be useful to have a look and decide what does need to happen here longer term, and maybe this would be a good thing to do. So
right.
I wasn't really thinking of this as a meeting to discuss problems at Grenfell, other than the fact that perhaps the work was running late.
Despite the language and tone in which the concerns have been expressed by Mr. Daffan in the emails I've read to you, do you accept that it was incumbent on the council to take them seriously?
Yes.
Yes. And Mr. Daffan invited you in the email I've read to you to take make a commitment, a personal commitment as leader to take a personal interest in the project. Did you make such a commitment to Mr. Daffan?
No, I didn't. I suggested, well, not in so many words, not precisely like that, but I said I wanted to have another discussion, an ongoing discussion. I wanted to go and see a flat on the estate, which he wasn't over enthusiastic about me doing, but a lady there said, come and see my flat, and I went in and had a look, and I certainly didn't think it was a slum. It's quite a strange estate because it has these very big internal courtyards covered with steps up, and then you have a walkway round, and the flat doors go off the walkway. So there's an awful lot of wasted space, and I remember 20 years before there had been security and protection, people concerned about people coming into the Lancaster West finger blocks, and there'd been quite a lot of extensive work done on security arrangements. And I looked in the lady's flat, and she showed me her kitchen and bathroom, and I sort of had a chat with her about it. And I wasn't going to extrapolate from one visit, but at least it reassured me she wasn't living in a slum.
We've seen that Mr. Daffan suggested that the scrutiny committee had ignored what he describes as an extreme fire risk.
Yes.
Related to the power surges
Yes.
in May 2013, so the same month you became leader, I think.
Yes.
Did that put you on notice to pay particular attention to the issue of fire safety, either during or as a result of the refurbishment project at Grenfell Tower?
Yes, I was very exercised by the reports of the power surge, and I raised it promptly with the then town clerk, Sir Derek Myers, and asked him to make it as a priority to investigate what had happened. This wasn't a problem with some council work. This was one of the utilities, and I believe there was a cable, and there'd been some arcing of the cable which had caused a surge. But I needed to be reassured this wasn't a fire risk, and there wasn't some hazard. And a report was produced, which I saw, and I think that report was referred to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee. I think either, I'm not sure now, but I think a letter was sent to residents, or even a meeting was held with residents. And I felt reassured that actually, no, this wasn't a fire risk. This wasn't something that was going to get into the tower or whatever, but there was a problem with it, and it needed to be sorted out, and it had been sorted out.
Did the question of who was going to pay for the damage done to the electrical equipment in individual residents' flats cross your desk?
I think it did, yes.
What was the upshot of that?
It seemed to me very, very small beer. We're talking about there had been it's like a fuse blowing and a toaster or a kettle no longer working. And I think my view was they should be replaced, and the TMO or whatever might have a fund that they could replace. But I didn't think it was something the leader of the council should be fretting over. It seemed quite small scale. My concern was the safety, and I was reassured that the safety had not been compromised.
Did you suggest to the TMO that they should set up a fund to assist in reimbursing the residents?
I don't remember.
Right.
I don't think I would have spent very much time on it. I might have made a throwaway remark to somebody, but
Right.
it seemed to me it wouldn't have been a very big sum of money.
No.
But it was the safety that I was worried about, not the loss of the toaster.
Did you get into the question of the TMO's legal responsibility for compensating residents for the damage to their equipment as a result of the power surge?
I didn't. I think that's a technical matter for the council's legal team, insurance team, the TMO, and I don't think I need to get involved in that.
Now, at the meeting, do you remember asking any questions about the consultation process that was then ongoing in relation to the project?
Do you mean the Grenfell Tower project,
Yes,
or do you mean...
the Grenfell Tower?
No, I don't think I asked any questions about the Grenfell Tower project, but I think I did ask Mr. Daffan about whether there might be an opportunity for him to consult as, a leading resident with members. I think there were 400 or 500 households, and I thought he could speak to them.
Yes. Let me try the question a slightly different way. Did the fact that Mr. Daffan was bringing to you, among other things, the question, why has the Grenfell Tower improvement project been delayed for over a year? Did the fact that he was asking you that question lead you to think that the consultation process in relation to the refurbishment had gone awry?
No, I don't think it did. I think my understanding was there was a retendering going on, and I think the original anticipation that it might be done by one contractor wasn't going to be the case, and there was a delay. But I think the consultation had taken place much earlier on what might be done, and tenants had been carefully consulted, I think, at Grenfell about the works and what would happen, and the new heating units and the new windows and the external cladding. I think they
Right.
consulted.
Did this thought cross your mind? Why is the TMO not provided this answer to Mr. Daffan instead of him coming to me to ask the question?
No, not at that time. When I came in, as I said, I thought it would be useful to meet as many people as possible, and I knew Mr. Daffan had issues around the power surges and now issues around the Lancaster West estate, the non-Grenfell part of it. And I thought, it would be good to go and see him directly and talk. And once sometimes as leader, you don't need to be sitting in a big committee meeting with formal notes and officers and everybody taking positions. You can just go and talk to people and find out actually what is happening and come to your own view as well. You don't have to accept what everybody's telling you. Yeah. So I was at that stage here, and this was very much an informal visit to look at Lancaster West, to talk to him, to see if I could find out whether the EMB might come back in some shape or form or not. And what might happen there longer term, or maybe nothing would happen. And, I needed to know whether it was a slum. I mean, that's what it... And then I thought I could perhaps put him right on one or two things like the decamp policy, which we were very, very careful. I'd insisted, right from the beginning, if we were going to do refurbishments or renovations of estates, which we were going to have to do, there must be a right for all tenants and leaseholders to return to the newly refurbished. And there was no way we would proceed unless that happened. Otherwise, there would be social cleansing, which we were very strongly opposed to.
Yes. Having made the decision to meet Mr. Daffan one-on-one, as you've described, were you struck by the depth of feeling that he'd expressed in his emails?
Well, I thought they were articulate in one sense, but they were overhyped and inaccurate in others. And but that's quite often what happens. If you're a councillor, you get a lot of letters which are people are very cross about something, and they perhaps overstate a case, or they only state one side of the argument, not two, and that does happen. So you've seen quite a few emails a bit like this, and you need to try and get to the bottom of what's actually happening.
Did you ask yourself why there was, as appears, such bad blood between the TMO and these groups, and Mr. Daffan in particular?
No, there are people who've had long-standing antagonisms, and I thought this was an opportunity to perhaps cut through them. And I, wasn't going with any other purpose, no hidden agenda. Just wanted to find out why he'd written these things, try and put some of them right, have a look at the estate, and talk to him about the long-term prospects.
Can we look at RBK 3046008, please? This is an email from you to Councillor Fielding Mellon, which you sent on the 27th of September 2013. And you send him a draft letter which you were proposing to send to Mr. Daffan, grateful for any comments, amendments, additions, you say. And then there's the text of it below. And under the text, or in the text, you embed a list of issues. And you say in the second paragraph, I thought it would be helpful to put together a list of the issues which came up and which need to be addressed. We can revisit these when we meet again at the end of November, and I will ask Rock to join us so we can agree a common agenda and a way forward. And then you set out a long bullet list of issues to consider. Now, even though this was a draft, and in fact the letter was sent out in pretty much this form, does it fairly reflect the issues discussed?
Yes, I think that does reflect the issues. Yes.
I mean, taking away all the tone and language, were you left with the impression that the residents of Grenfell Tower had genuine concerns about each of these issues?
No, this is really much more about the finger blocks on the rest of the estate. These are the low-rise blocks alongside Grenfell Tower. So I wasn't getting involved in a rerun of the consultation on Grenfell Tower. I wasn't aware of all the details as to when work was going to start. That, to me, was a separate project about which there'd been a lot of discussion. This was about my meeting with Edward Daffan and other residents to discuss the other part of the estate and some of the wider issues about the estate management board. And I think I've got here when the work on Grenfell will start. But my reference to do residents want to see a refurbishment or a rebuilding of all or part of the estate, that was the fundamental question I had about the finger blocks, not Grenfell. Though.
That was your question, was it?
Yeah, these are all my questions that I picked up from the meeting, and I thought we needed to work through. If we had a follow-up meeting, I thought maybe Rock and I and Edward Daffan and anybody else could discuss these things and try and answer these points and explain what was happening.
Yes. And do you remember what Mr. Daffan said about the EMB?
I don't really, other than I think he probably echoed the fact that, you know, it very rarely met, it wasn't quorate, it wasn't a functioning body, and I think the council's view, I can't remember the chronology of events here, was that probably the MB needed to go and it needed to all be put back in with the TMO. And maybe he didn't want that, I don't know, but I think I'm reading too much into that.
And you suggested meeting again, I think.
Yes.
At the end of November.
Yes.
And was that to take things further forward?
Yes.
What did you tell him about the delays to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project, which was the first question he'd started this off with?
I don't remember in detail what I now said, other than that probably it was because they were having to go out to retender because there were issues about the initial contractor. I think the idea that the contractor could do all three buildings, the academy, the leisure centre and the tower, had fallen apart.
Right. And
the TMO was going out to retender, and that inevitably involves delay, and very frustrating for everybody involved. But you know, that's better than having a bad contractor.
Yes. Did you say anything about the budget? Was there any discussion about budgetary considerations in relation to the retendering?
No, I don't think we did discuss that, and I can't now remember the chronology back to when the cabinet was increasing the budget for the Grenfell project to was it 9.7 and then 10.3, and I can't remember where this fits into that. Maybe this was a bit before that.
This I think was after.
After.
First
okay.
Increase to 9.7.
Right.
So I think the budget had been increased in the summer of 2013
right.
to 9.7 from the initial 6. That's the chronology.
Yes.
So, can we look at RBK 3046009, please? And we could take this, I think, quickly. This is Councillor Fielding Mellon's response to you on the 27th of September, same day. Second email on page 1, as you can see. You can't. You look down, second email on that page. Yes, you can now, at 1728. And he responds with some amendments. And then... at the top of the screen, if you go up to that, please, top of the page, you thank him for the amendments. This is your email of 3rd of October 2013, and you say in the second full paragraph, although we can meet with officers, I tend to find that such meetings become rather defensive and entrenched. Which officers were you referring to there, TMO or RBKC?
No, that was a general remark about officers. It wasn't any particular officers from any particular department. It was that occasionally elected members, elected to represent residents, can have a dialogue without officers, and that sometimes more comes out of that than everybody coming along and talking about budgets and timetables and some of the rather more formal things, which certainly do have to be discussed. I'm not suggesting they aren't, but I wanted to just have this informal discussion to find out whether he was truly representative of wider views, which I think is quite important when you're a councillor. Is this person speaking for everybody, or is this person speaking with a loud voice on their own behalf? Is this person genuinely representative, or is this person not? And I think you have to sort of, if you're in a political role, that's part of what you have to do.
Yes. You say, I tend to find that such meetings become rather defensive and entrenched.
Yeah.
Had you had any experiences of meetings between officers whether TMO or RBKC, and the residents of the Lancaster West estate, where defensiveness and entrenched positions were a feature?
No, I've had no experience of meetings with residents of Lancaster West Estate other than this meeting that I was having.
So when you say I tend to find that such meetings become rather
that was me speaking as a councillor with many years of experience of residents coming in and meeting officers, and the residents overstating the case and the officers being very defensive, and and you don't really get very far. Everybody sort of walks out and doesn't feel that much has happened.
Right, just to be clear then, it wasn't your impression that officers of the TMO had not been able to engage with Grenfell Tower residents at meetings because of defensive or entrenched positions?
No, as far as I understood it, and I didn't understand it in any great detail, but there had been extensive consultation with residents of Grenfell Tower about what was going to be done and whether they wanted it to be done and what their concerns were about the estate. And so that had happened and had been banked, as it were, and we were now waiting for the works to start. The works, when they were done, were going to reflect what residents wanted to see, as far as I was aware, and certainly at this meeting.
Now let's look at the letter that was sent. MET 30042240. This is the final letter that was sent to Mr. Daffon as a result of the meetings and the drafting process we've just seen. And it's on your headed notepaper. It's a formal letter.
Yep.
3rd of October 2013, so the same day that you got the draft back from Mr. Fielding Mellon. And it runs over 2 pages, and it essentially sets out the issues to consider and the walkabout issues. If you go scroll down page 1 and then scroll into page 2, that's the letter. Did Mr. Daffon respond to this letter? Or any of the representatives of the other groups?
Well, there was a lot of correspondence, I think, from Mr. Daffon, sort of going to all sorts of people over the council, and I can't now distinguish between whether he wrote back to this. I think the idea was we had a follow-up meeting and we would discuss these issues.
Yeah.
And he may have written back saying, yes, I look forward to meeting you or whatever, right. And we did have a follow-up meeting.
You did have a follow-up meeting, yes, we'll come to that. Just before we do that, I just want to show you 1 or 2 intervening things. First, please, IWS 402298. Which is a Grenfell Action Group blog from 28th of October 2013, so about 3.5 weeks after your letter.
Yep.
Posted on the 28th of October 2013, and there's a striking picture below it. There's a cartoon of King Canute with a rubber duck on his lap, and a text below it. The leader of the council, Councillor Nick Paget-Brown, was kind and gracious enough to come to Lancaster West in September and meet with representatives of the Grenfell Action Group, the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association and the Lancaster West Residents Association. He wrote to us on 3rd October, briefly setting out his recollection and understanding of the issues raised. This was indeed welcome and appears to have been a clear indication of Councillor Paget-Brown's genuine and ongoing interest in the problems besetting this community. Did you read this blog? I'm showing it to you in a bit of detail to try and trigger a recollection, but do you remember seeing this at the time?
No, I didn't read blogs generally when I was leader. Very occasionally the press office would bring something to my attention from a blog that was circulating in the borough, this one and others. But I have read the blog quite extensively since June 2017. But I didn't read this, and I don't recall seeing this certainly at the time. And
right.
But it just reflects what was happening. I was trying to enter into a dialogue and have some discussions, and so that all sounds quite good at this stage.
Yes, reading down though, it says, if you just look at the next paragraph, unfortunately some of the points in his letter were, in our view, somewhat inaccurate. It seemed to betray a failure on his part to fully understand the issues we brought to his attention, or at least to fully grasp our perspective and our particular concerns. And then it goes over onto the next page at some length in relation to that. At the end, if I can show you page 3, in the last 4 lines of the first paragraph, he says, or it says, as already stated, he gave the impression that he was listening, and that he was genuinely concerned about the issues at Lancaster West. We can only hope that he will therefore fully investigate these matters to ensure that he fully understands the issues. We should wait, therefore, to see what he will do. And then in bold, he certainly knows how to talk the talk. Let's just wait to see now whether he can walk the walk also. We're expecting to meet with Councillor Paget-Brown again shortly when he will be hosting us at his house. We can hardly wait. And then there's some link to another blog. Did nobody brought this to your attention at the time? Is that right?
No, I don't think so. I'm sure I wouldn't have been hosting a meeting at my house.
No. Well, did anybody from these three organisations, or Mr. Daffon in particular, write back to you in response to your letter and inform you that you had misunderstood the points that were being made at the meeting?
I can't remember. He might have done.
Right. If we then go, please, on in time to RBK 46017. This is an email chain between you, Mr. Daffon, and others, and it starts on page 5, please, with an email from you to Mr. Daffon on the 8th of November 2013. So after the King Canute blog post of the 28th of October 2013, and you are writing to him, thanking him for his email of the 25th of October, and you say, as Ms. Coyle has advised you would happen, Ms. Parker, the Chief Solicitor and Monitoring Officer, has looked into this matter. I'm satisfied there's been no cover-up about the Grenfell Tower power surge, nor any attempt to be obstructive. It does appear, however, that there has been some confusion around your email to Ms. Johnson of 10th September, for which I apologise. And then he discusses some legal questions about whether or not an earlier email of his, which we haven't looked at, of the 10th of September 2013, was an FOI request or a request sent pursuant to a pre-action protocol. Do you remember that issue? The issue of whether or not a request from Mr. Daffon should be treated as an FOI or as a pre-action protocol request?
I don't remember that. We often got sort of issues of definitions of whether things were FOI or whether they were other categories of complaint. And I did leave senior officers to deal with that, and I really didn't think that was one for me.
Right. If we go to page 3, we can see his response on the 11th of November 2013, bottom of the page. Dear Councillor Paget-Brown, thank you for taking the time to write to me personally. And then in the third line, I do not accept your assertion that RBKC have not attempted to be obstructive with regards to this matter that reeks of council legalese and time wasting. And then he sets out something from Amanda Johnson in the body of the email, and then goes on page 4, to draw to your attention in the third paragraph, although it's not indented, well, it's not gapped. If you're familiar with the coroner's report from the Lacknell House fire that killed 6 tower block residents in South London in 2009, then you will know that the fire was started by an electrical fault in a television set. Please bear this in mind while you read the rest of this correspondence. And then it continues on the subject of what happened as a result of the power surge and smoke and sparks, television sets breaking, etc. At this point, were you familiar with the Lacknell House fire?
Yes.
And with the coroner's recommendations which arose from the inquests?
Not directly, unless they've been in a council paper that I'd seen or had come to the cabinet before I became leader. But I don't remember reading them directly myself, but they may have been incorporated into a council paper.
Did you, or were you prompted to go away and look at the coroner's report as a result of Mr. Daffon's reference to it in this email?
No, I wasn't, no.
Why is that?
Well, I felt that the issue that he'd been concerned about had been dealt with by the utility company who had provided the repair and dealt with it, and that there had been some fusing of equipment, but maybe this here is overstated, and I wasn't quite sure what he was expecting me to do. This fault had been put right by the utility. It was a utility fault, and the council had reported on what had been done, circulated that to the tenants, to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee. I'd asked for it to be looked into as a great matter of urgency. and I felt again this was beginning to overstate, having seen other letters and concerns, that, you know, some of his letters did not actually reflect the reality on the ground.
If you scroll down a little bit further into the same page, lower down the same page, you can see that there is a reference just below halfway down your screen to this. It says, "We are also aware," can you see, if we just have that pointed for you?
Yes.
We're also aware that Mr. Black from the TMA made allegations that the Grenfell Action Group and other local stakeholders had made misleading statements on our blog and in round-robin emails. When we challenged Mr. Black to substantiate these allegations by informing us what statements he believed that we gave that contained misleading information, he could not explain himself. Despite several opportunities, Mr. Black has failed to provide any evidence for the statements that he made to the Scrutiny Committee. Did you take any steps yourself to investigate what Mr. Black had told the Scrutiny Committee regarding the Grenfell Action Group's blog posts?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Well, nobody had, I don't think, mentioned it to me at the time. Mr. Black was the chief executive of the TMO. He'd been asked to appear at the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee and report on the power surge problem. I don't know what he said. I wasn't at that meeting. The Director of Housing would have been there. The Cabinet Member for Housing would have been there. The Chairman of the Scrutiny Committee would have been there. And I can't really say any more other than that the issue of the power surges had been dealt with, and it appeared to have been dealt with satisfactorily. And some of these blogs and Mr. Daffan's statements, as we saw in the earlier letter to me, I thought were overstated and hugely inaccurate.
Did you raise this allegation with Mr. Black in one of your regular meetings with him?
I don't recall doing so.
Why is that?
I don't think it was sort of registering as a very, I mean, I was trying to meet Mr. Daffan, elicit what might be the way forward on the Lancaster West Finger Block estate. He'd written some quite, what shall I say, colourfully worded letters, which I thought were inaccurate and wrong. And now there's this reference to the power surges where he doesn't seem satisfied with the report that's been sent to the Scrutiny Committee. And I didn't know what Mr. Black might or might not have said, and I thought there were other people in a better position to deal with it than me.
Did you meet Mr. Daffan? I think you did at the end of November 2013 as the follow-up meeting.
There was a follow-up meeting. I can't remember when.
Right. At that follow-up meeting, did you ask Mr. Daffan what it was that Mr. Black had said, which he, Mr. Daffan, said was false?
No, I don't think it was on my radar that Mr. Black had said false things, and that I didn't feel if that was the allegation, it was one I had to sort out.
Right. Was the meeting at the end of November 2013 the last occasion on which you met him?
No, I saw him at a number of events. I think I mentioned the West London Citizens.
I'm sorry, but when I say met him, I met him as part of an agreed meeting, rather than an encounter.
Yes. I think that was the last formal meeting he and I had.
Yes. Was it constructive? Do you remember?
I fear it wasn't.
Let's look at RBK 30284220, please. This is an email sent by you to Mr. Daffan of the 30th of January 2014. Dear Edward, thank you for your further email and subsequent reminder. My apologies for the delay in replying. And I could read it all to you, but let me just ask you to look, please, at the third paragraph. Whenever I ask you whether residents favour refurbishment or reconstruction of the estate, you're not able to advise me or even to reassure me that you're speaking for a reasonable number of residents. Instead, you resort to wild and inaccurate allegations about what the council is planning to do. The Estate Management Board has clearly found it difficult to attract residents to serve on it, so perhaps it has outlived its usefulness as a tool to manage the estate. At our last meeting, I also mentioned the TMO survey of residents, which gives a different picture from that painted by you. Given your opposition to almost every suggestion that has come forward, I'm at a loss to know how to proceed. The power surges are a matter for the utility company, and individual claims should be made against it. I understand that the TMO has also approved an ex gratis payment to tenants who were affected. I'm sorry we appear to have exhausted constructive dialogue on how to approve the estate. What aspects of Mr. Daffan's allegations against the council did you consider to be wild and inaccurate?
Well, I I'd been worried when I got the original letter about the slum conditions, and as I say, I hadn't been there for a long time, and I thought there was an opportunity to go and look, and when I went and looked, I didn't find slum conditions. So that, to me, was reassuring, and it was misleading in the letter. I think he'd referred somewhere in one of those letters to a fascist decant policy, and I thought that was immensely, potentially damaging, because that was absolutely not the intention of the council. I've tried to explain that at some point we passed a motion saying that any regeneration on any estates would enable all tenants and leaseholders who wish to do so to return. So I thought if the idea that the council was running a fascist decant policy was ludicrous. I thought the estate management board, it was clear that it wasn't going to spring back into life. And I think the claims about the equipment that was destroyed, I think, well, we covered that a few minutes ago, but I think my view was, well, if something has been destroyed, then the TMO could for goodwill, pay for it to be replaced. But these were small items, and I was reassured that there wasn't a fire risk.
What was the source of your understanding that the TMO had approved an ex gratia payment to tenants who were affected, as you say there?
I can't remember now who told me that, but I notice I've copied in Councillor Fielding Mellon. He might have told me, or somebody might have told me, that really, in the overall scheme of things, this was not huge. This was somebody clearly had agreed an ex gratia payment. I thought that was a good idea, and that, to my mind, was the end of the matter. Did
you engage with Mr. Daffon further following this email? Or was this the end of the chain?
I think it's the end of the chain. I don't know if he replied to this.
Now, moving further on, we can go to 2015. If you go to your second statement, please, page 6, and go to paragraph 22. You mentioned 3 visits to Grenfell Tower on 3 occasions: 22nd of October 2015, 11th of May 2016, and 13th of May 2016. If you can see there,
yes,
where you say that. Can we look at RBK 405826, please, at page 1? This is if we go to the foot of page 1, an email from Rita Dexter of London Fire of the 14th of July 2014 to Nicholas Holgate, and she attaches 2 documents entitled Councillor Guide on Fire Safety for Use During Estate Visits and Councillor Guide on Fire Safety for Use During Council Meetings. And she explains in her letter, as you can see at the foot of the page there, that those guides have been produced following the coroner's recommendations into the tragic deaths of 6 people at Lacanal in 2009. And cutting a long story short, we know that Nicholas Holgate forwarded those guides to Mel Barrett and Laura Johnson, and Laura Johnson in turn forwarded those guides to Councillor Fielding Mellon and Councillor Marshall. Do you remember seeing those guides?
I honestly can't remember.
I'll show you one.
Can I look?
Yes, LFB 401294 and 1295. Let's have them up side by side, please. That's the one about estate visits. And if we have 1295, please, at the same time, there's a red one. There it is. And that's about fire safety for use during council meetings. Do they look familiar to you? They're striking documents. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, they do look familiar, but that's all I can say, really. I think I've seen these before, and I think I must have seen them at the time,
right,
or soon after the time.
Right. You think you saw them at the time. Would you have read them at the time?
Glanced at them.
Right. Glancing at it, would you have seen, looking at the blue one, first of all, the text on the right-hand side under the tower block question mark, confirming the emergency evacuation is in place? Would you have seen that, read that?
Well, I probably did, but I would have assumed that was being dealt with by others.
Right.
Emergency evacuation plan, but also stay put principle, and that's what sort of been drummed into me for years, that if there was a a fire, people should stay put, except the people in the flat that was on fire. So,
Right. You say it was drummed into you. Did you glance at the second page, left-hand column, and the bullet points there, underneath the words "you can ask"? It's not on the screen. We need to the blue version, second page. There it is, top left-hand corner. What emergency evacuation plan is in place for this building? How have residents been informed about it? Are fire escapes and other parts of the escape route, such as corridors, stairwells, check regularly for obstructions, emergency lighting and signage? Did you look at that, do you think?
I probably did, yes. I mean, I can't say it's word for word. I now remember looking at it, but I think I did. I would have noted the thing about fire escapes and means of escape and blockages in corridors and on staircases, and putting in lighting on stairs, all this kind of thing. But I would expect that to be dealt with by the TMO team responsible for health and safety. I mean, this is useful for me to know, but this is actually something that would be checked on by the TMO.
Yes. You made 3 visits to Grenfell Tower on the dates we've looked at.
Yes.
And that's after the date on which you received this document. Do you remember asking any of these questions in respect of Grenfell Tower during those visits?
I think in one of the visits there was an issue about the numbering of the floors, and that was sort of under discussion while I was there, I think.
Right.
Because they'd actually found some more property at the bottom of the tower in previous rooms that I think had been used for maintenance and plant, and they'd been able to turn those into flats, but then they had a numbering issue. How did you number them? And I think at the time I visited, where work was still ongoing to some extent, they were dealing with that issue.
Right, and was that issue resolved to your personal satisfaction, do you remember?
I can't remember. I don't know. I don't know.
You didn't follow up on it?
No.
No. Can we look at the red version, please? LFV 401295. This is the Councillor Guide on Fire Safety for use during council meetings. And if you go to page 2 in that, please, you can see it says, what can councillors do? Do not make assumptions that fire safety is being actively or effectively managed in purpose-built blocks of flats and maisonettes in your borough. Councillors can make their boroughs safer by scrutinising how responsibilities for fire safety are met and ensuring that the fire safety in your borough is continuously being monitored and improved. Did you read that?
I probably did at the time, yes.
Did you understand it?
I understood it, and I would have assumed from what it said there that the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, and you mentioned earlier Laura Johnson passing this to the chairman, that would feature in their scrutiny of the TMO and the premises, TMO premises in general.
Yes. By making that assumption, were you not doing exactly what the LFB was advising you not to do?
Possibly.
Can you?
But I thought there was a structure in place for dealing with fire safety scrutiny, and that was the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee. It was receiving reports, as I understood it, on fire risk assessments after Lacanal. That had been supplemented by, I think, additional reports on what was being done on we talked about it yesterday, the closers and the new doors and that kind of thing. And I thought the Scrutiny Committee was the point of focus in the council where this would be happening.
Did reading this text not prompt you to say to those responsible on the officers' side, I need to be assured afresh that there is an adequate and effective system in place whereby the scrutiny of the TMO's performance in relation to fire safety is being properly performed?
Well, I didn't ask that of the officers, but I probably didn't ask it because I felt that was happening and that the reports that the Scrutiny Committee got from the TMO were incorporating details of what was being done on fire safety.
But feeling that it's already happening is
well, it was happening.
What you're not supposed to do in response to this notice. Would you accept that? It says, do not make assumptions that fire safety is being actively or effectively managed.
No, I wasn't making an assumption. That the notice is saying you need to make sure that councillors are scrutinising what the fire risk arrangements for the TMO properties are, and I was comfortable that the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee was doing that, and that therefore what this says was being met. So I don't think I would have thought about it anymore.
So you didn't take a fresh look at the scrutiny arrangements,
No, I
particularly
didn't.
in relation to fire safety?
No.
If we go to TMO, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm noting the time.
Yes.
I'm not far off the end, but I won't finish before an appropriate moment for a break.
Well, that's the question. Do you think you have more than about 10 minutes questions left?
Yes, probably about 15 or 20, possibly. I'd say 20 minutes to be safe, and that's
I
probably...
think in that case we'll...
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Paget-Brown, I was just feeling the ground to see whether it might be possible to get to the end of your questions before we had a break, but I think probably it'd be wiser to have the break now. So we'll stop now. We'll resume, please, at 25 to 12, and then we'll carry on then. And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while they're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you. 25 to 12, please. Would you ask Mr. Paget-Brown to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Paget-Brown, ready to carry on?
Yes, indeed, sir.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Paget-Brown, can I ask you please to be shown TMO 100 42979? Yes, thank you very much. Now, this is a letter addressed to you, dated the 5th of January 2015, from the LFB. And it's entitled Protecting Fire Safety in Refurbished Buildings. And if you go to page 2, it's signed by Rita Dexter, the Deputy Commissioner. You can see that there.
Yep.
If we go back to the first page, you can see that in manuscript, somebody's written, and I think it looks like you're writing as an amateur typographer. Is that yours at the top, Joanna FYI?
Yes, that is mine.
Who is Joanna?
That is Councillor Joanna Gardner, who was the cabinet member I think I referred to yesterday in my amended statement, responsible for IT, corporate matters and community safety, which would include fire and police.
Right. I see. So this didn't go to to Councillor Fielding Mellon, for example.
No, because I think it's an audit, a request for an audit.
Yes.
And I thought Joanna, because she would be having links with the fire brigade, should know about it, should see this. And I noticed at the very top of the document, which we can't now see, but I noticed she's passed it to the planning department, which seems to me to be quite a sensible place to send it to.
That's right. Please pass to Mr. Bohr.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they would have the details that would enable the audit to be completed best, I think.
Was there any reason? I mean, you're right that it discusses an audit, and in fact, from the third paragraph, you can see that it encloses an audit tool.
Yes.
The purpose is referred to there. Did you think to pass this to Laura Johnson?
No.
Why is that?
Because I thought Joanna Gardner would be better at getting the audit completed, because she would, as the community safety person for the whole borough, would do exactly what, in fact, she has done, which is to talk to the planners, or get the planners probably, in reality, to complete the survey, because they would have plans of borough buildings.
I just wonder about that. If you look at the second paragraph, it says, in our experience, buildings can and do become compromised in fire safety terms as a result of refurbishment works. We're all aware of high-profile cases, but the brigade regularly comes across many other examples, and she attaches some pen pictures and a death as a consequence. And then she says this: we consider that refurbishment works that compromise fire safety pose a serious risk to the safety of residents and the general public, and that therefore authorities need a strategy for assessing that risk and for taking appropriate remedial action. Now, just pausing there, given that this was to do with refurbishment works, why not send this directly to those councillors who are more directly responsible for refurbishment works, whether as part of the TMO or other aspects of RBKC's property estate?
Well, there are 19 towers in the borough, and I think at any time in the future there may have been refurbishment works of other towers. That was being discussed, that was a possibility. It seemed to me Grenfell Tower, this was 2015, so work was, I think, by now well underway, and Grenfell Tower had hired fire safety consultants, and I didn't actually think this was, I actually felt this would be better going through the council and looking at all the council's high-rise buildings, and because they might be refurbished in future, and Grenfell was taken care of by having a fire safety, as far as I knew, fire safety consultant advising on what was going to be done, and
right.
So I didn't think that we needed to worry about Grenfell. That was being taken care of.
Right. Two things flow from that. First, you say, as far as I knew, there was a fire safety consultant involved in the Grenfell Tower refurbishment. What was the basis of that understanding? How did you come to know that?
I don't now remember, but I must at some point have seen a list of the various people, the contractors that were involved in doing different things at the tower, and I know one of them was fire safety, and I'm sure when the discussions took place with the architects and with Rydens, they would have wanted to have fire safety advice. So
Right.
I felt that was being taken. I don't know quite how. I mean, you do pick up all sorts of things over the years, and I don't know how I knew it, but I think I did know it.
So was it because of that understanding, as you've just explained it, that you didn't think that it was necessary to put this document into the hands of either the councillors or officers of RBKC so as to ensure that the TMO had it?
Perhaps I should have done that. It could have gone the other way, but I think then everybody would have said, "Oh, it's about Grenfell, and we've got, the fire safety at Grenfell is being considered by the fire safety consultants." And then the other 18 towers, which might at some point have been refurbished. I think this was asking for an audit. It seemed to me that this was a sensible place to send it, but maybe in retrospect it wasn't.
In fact, it did come to David Gibson in February 2015, or rather the audit tool did. Do you remember whether you tabled this letter as a discussion topic in Cabinet?
No, I'm sure I didn't discuss it in Cabinet.
Is it right that your role was simply to receive it and then hand it on to Joanna Gardner?
Well, my role was to...
I say your role, I mean what you did.
Yes, this letter arrived in the post bag. It's an audit tool requiring certain technical pieces of information. I thought Joanna Gardner might want to discuss it with the Borough Fire Commander or aspects of it. I didn't think Grenfell Tower needed the works at Grenfell Tower I felt were being taken care of elsewhere, and work was underway. And she sent this to the planners, which struck me as not a bad place to send it. They would have details of buildings, refurbishment. They'd have to grant planning permission to any tower that was going to be refurbished, and they would have to attach conditions to the planning consent. And it seemed to me this wasn't a bad place for it to have ended up. I didn't necessarily think she'd immediately pass it to the planners, but she did, and I certainly at the time wouldn't have had a quarrel with it.
Did you look at the appendix to this letter on page 3, do you think? If you go to page 3. We can see it there. Case studies of failure of fire protection measures, as you can see at the top of the page there. Did you look at that, do you think?
I don't remember whether I did or not. I really don't remember.
Do you remember having any thoughts about challenges or risks to the integrity of compartmentation in tower blocks as a result of refurbishment? Seeing this letter.
Well, I knew compartmentation was very important, and that planners would be looking to make sure that any plan submitted would not compromise compartmentation. So I thought that this was going to be discussed by the Cabinet Member for Community Safety with the Fire Commander for the Borough, and that planners would look to make sure that when plans did come forward, there were conditions and care was taken. It seemed to me this was something that officers in that department should see and take account of.
Now, the letter attached an audit tool. Let's look at that. It's at TMO 100042956. That's the first page of it. That's the introductory part. And describes what the audit tool does and has, namely 3 parts. Do you remember looking at that?
No, I suspect I probably only read the covering letter quite carefully. There's some technical detail here which no, I don't recall looking at this.
Right. But perhaps just look at page 2 as a visual exercise and just see if this triggers a recollection. Did you look at the detail of this in particular? This is the
Just
part.
going back to the first page just for a moment, it does
Yeah.
talk about cross-disciplinary working, which does suggest that several departments need to be involved in this.
Was that a thought that you had at the time of the document, or a thought that's just occurred to you now, looking at it now?
I think it's probably occurred to me now, but I can quite see that this could have ended up in various places. We were talking earlier about the environmental health audit, the by-borough environmental health audit, but I think actually it was very sensible to send it to the planners, because the planning is the gatekeeping when a planning application comes in, and they will want to make sure that whatever plans there are for refurbishing a tower don't compromise compartmentation. So it seemed to me that was the right place for it to go. And sorry, I realise that's diverted you from what you wanted to ask.
Not at all. No, my question was if you go to page 2, whether you actually looked at the details.
No, not at this. No, I didn't.
No. Now, David Gibson told us in evidence, and just for reference purposes, it's day 53, page 201 at line 20 to page 202 at line 7, that this tool was never used by the TMO to address whether Grenfell Tower was compliant, even though it was plainly relevant to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment. Are you able to account for why the TMO senior management involved in that project did not think that it was relevant to apply to that project?
Well, presumably when the planning application for Grenfell Tower went forward, that preceded this document by some considerable period of time. And it still seems to me that for future refurbishments, this document is best completed by planning people who can then make sure the appropriate condition is attached to any future planning application. And I think the Grenfell application was much earlier than this document.
Let's look back at your correspondence log again. Slightly different topic. RBK 30544425. We looked at it earlier this morning, but if we go to page 3, we can see the entry for the 22nd of October 2015, and that's in bold, second item down from the top. NPB visit to Grenfell Tower works. See item 3, Little Roman 1 of NPB meeting with Town Clerk on 23rd October 15, recording this, met at Ryden Compound. Do you remember what the purpose of your visit to Grenfell Tower was on that date?
I'm really not remembering it at all clearly. I think it was what they call a hard hat tour, and it would have been to see how the works were coming on. This is October 2015, so yes, I think the works would have been well underway, probably in mid progress.
Yes.
And I think it was what one might call a courtesy visit to see what was happening, and but I don't really, in all honesty, I don't really remember it very much.
Right. Did you remember meeting with any residents during that visit?
No, I don't think so. No, I think it was just some of the contractors and the...
Was there any discussion that you recall that took place involving you or that you heard about fire safety during that visit?
No, I really can't remember the visit and the conversations I had very much at all, and I can't say they would have included fire safety. I really can't recall the visit very clearly.
If we stick with the same document, but go to page 4, please, you can see that there's an entry at the top of the page from the 11th of May 2016, which says, with officers Robert Black and Councillor Fielding Mellon, or FM, visit Grenfell Tower, call in on a resident. Was this Dennis Murphy who died in the fire? NPB took photos. Do you remember why you visited the tower that day?
Yes, I think the works were beginning to near the end, and I think the TMO wanted to show us what had been done, and which I think we had an initial look at the boxing club. We looked at the club room downstairs. I think work was underway at the nursery at the back. And then they arranged for us to go and meet a resident.
Do you remember why?
I do. Just one other thing.
Yes.
While I'm talking about that, I think I had picked up, maybe from Councillor Blakeman, I'm not sure, that there was an issue with some residents about the location of the new boilers being put in the hall and not in the kitchen. And I think I wanted to sort of see one of those, and they arranged for us to go and meet the resident, who I fear might have been Mr. Murphy.
Right, and you say that. Do you remember why you called on Dennis Murphy?
I think he'd been chosen as prepared to have a group of people walk around his flat in the middle of a morning and let us have a look at what had been done.
Were you aware, or did you become aware during that visit, that Dennis Murphy was a vulnerable resident who suffered from a serious respiratory illness?
No, not unduly. I think I noted that he was elderly and perhaps somewhat infirm, but not to the point of not being able to move around the flat. And
did your meeting Mr. Murphy, or your visit to his flat, lead you to ask any questions about what provision had been made for the evacuation of vulnerable residents such as him in the event of a fire?
No, I didn't ask that because, again, my understanding would be that if there was a fire, it would be contained. If it was in Mr. Murphy's flat, he should leave the fire, leave the flat, which I thought he was capable of doing, close the door. And I don't think anybody could possibly have envisaged the circumstances of the June the 14th fire, where the fire engulfed the whole building simultaneously. It just wasn't within our range of experience or knowledge. And so I would have expected compartmentation to have meant that Mr. Murphy would have left the flat if there had been a problem, and that the fire brigade would have come and they would have helped him out.
Right. So was it your thought at the time that in the event he had to evacuate from his flat, leave aside a more general fire, he would be assisted out by the LFB?
Yes.
Right. Did you have any thoughts about whether there was any personal evacuation plan for him in place?
No, I thought that would be the personal evacuation plan, that he would leave the flat and the fire brigade would come quickly and they would help him out if he was vulnerable. And I think I understood there were 2 lifts and one of them could be dedicated for fire.
Who told you that?
I don't remember, but I did know.
Right. Were you aware in general of a programme in general use called PEEPs, or Personal Emergency Evacuation Plans, to be used for vulnerable residents in high-rise residential blocks?
No, I can't say that I was aware that they were in use.
So does it follow from that you weren't aware whether or not the TMO had a programme in place for completing PEEPs for individual vulnerable residents in their housing stock?
No, I wasn't aware of that, but I was aware that the TMO were putting together and designing, I think, what they called a customer relations database, which would give them a picture of every property that the TMO was responsible for managing and could see who lived there. And on that database, you could mark particular things that might be worthy of note, that there was a vulnerable resident maybe, or indeed other things, and that was all linked to the repairs programme.
Was the database called the CRM? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was, yes.
Yeah. Was the evacuation of vulnerable residents ever discussed as a subject in Cabinet?
I don't believe it was.
No, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my prepared questions for Mr. Paget-Brown.
Yes,
this might be a convenient moment to take the customary final break.
Yes, thank you. Well, Mr. Paget-Brown, as you may know, at this stage, when Council thinks he's reached the end of his questions, we have to have a little break. First of all, to let him check that he has indeed reached the end of his questions, but also to allow others who are not present to suggest other questions we perhaps should ask you. So we're going to break now. We'll 10 past 12, Mr. Millett, would that be all right?
I think so, yes. And if I need longer, I can apply.
Well, we'll come back at 10 past 12, see if there are any more questions at that point. And in the meantime, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Thank you.
Would you like to go to the usher then, please?
Thank you.
Right. 12:10, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Paget-Brown to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Paget-Brown, we'll see if there are more questions for you. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just one or two, Mr. Paget-Brown. The first is in relation to the power surges, and you said this morning that you felt reassured that the power surges had not, in fact, presented a fire risk to the residents of Grenfell Tower. I'm summarising your evidence, but that was the gist of it, I think. Did you? Let me show you a document, ZUR 6025, please. Now, this is a report by RGE Services Limited, prepared for the insurers Zurich, entitled Flat Sub-Main Rising and Lateral Supplies Report, 29th May 2013. And it starts, the tenants above floor 10 were reporting smoke issues, lights and power failing intermittently. And then on testing the incoming supplies, sub-main cable voltages were shown as unusually high, as indicated below. And there's some technical data set out there. If you scroll down the screen, please, to lower down on page 1, you can see the rest of that. And it says we then carried out a more in-depth investigation, and more detail is set out. And then on page 2, we turn to that, please, you can see that it says, further investigation found badly damaged enclosure and service cable in the lower ground floor riser cupboard where there is evidence of severe burn and arcing damage. And then in the third paragraph, it says, on inspection, we found loose connections and the neutral cable had melted away from the clamp connections and could have caused a fire within the riser. Please see attached photos on the following sheets. Do you remember being told that the damage that they had found could have, in fact, caused a fire within the riser?
I don't remember being told that. I do remember being told about the arcing.
What had given you the impression that there had been no fire risk when we can see from this report that there was a fire risk?
I don't think I have seen this report, and I was basing my earlier comments on, I think, a paper which had gone to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, and I think it was that I did see,
right.
And it was that gave me reassurance. I don't think I've seen this.
From your recollection, did this report not also go to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee?
I don't know is the answer. It may have done, but I don't recall having seen this report.
Right.
But I think I saw a covering report.
If it had gone to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, do you accept that you would not have been labouring under the impression that there had been no fire risk as a result of the damage to the electrical cables identified here?
Well, clearly this sets out information I either didn't have or didn't take at the time, and clearly there is a risk in the riser. Yes.
Yes, thank you. We also looked this morning at Mr. Daffon's allegations against the council, and I asked you which you considered to be wild and inaccurate, and the slum conditions was one, and also what was referred to as the fascist decant policy, which you said was, you thought that if the council was running a fascist decant policy, then that was, in your words, ludicrous. Do you remember, just leaving aside the rhetoric for the moment and just getting to the core point, do you remember that Mr. Daffon's concern was that the core strategy had contained a guaranteed right of return in the event of regeneration, but the council's decant policy hadn't, or didn't? Do you remember that?
All I remember is, well, I think I remember the core strategy, certainly having that.
Yes.
I didn't know that the revised decant policy didn't make that clear, but I'm sure we would have wanted, between Councillor Fitting-Mellon and myself, to make it clear that any decant policy must include a right to return, and that was full council policy passed by the council, and that would have trumped any local document that might have existed saying otherwise. So the
Right.
council was very clear that residents who lived in refurbished estates or estates that were to be refurbished should have the right to return to their flats or to a similar property in that development, and resident leaseholders. And that was the clear council policy. It was certainly my clear policy, and
Right.
Councillor Field and Mellon's clear policy. So I'm not quite sure what the other decamp policy.
Right.
Not quite sure where it deviates from that. I'd have to go back and look at it.
I'll show you. But before I do you remember that the guaranteed right of return was originally included in the draft decant policy, but did not make its way into the final decant policy? Do you remember that as a feature or fact at the time?
I don't now remember that. I'm not sure why it came out. It certainly wasn't taken out with my approval. I don't know when were the dates of those.
Well, let's just look at a document. IWS 402075. And this is the first page of the decant policy. And if you look at page 2, you can see what the purpose is. You see that? And if you go to page 22, this is the final version. If you go to page 22, you can see under paragraph 7.9, under right to return, it says, the council will seek to negotiate a right to return for as many affected eligible residents as possible. Right to return means the right to return to the same area where the regeneration has taken place once the new properties have been built or redevelopment has taken place. This cannot be guaranteed and will depend on the particular circumstances of each individual regeneration scheme using this policy. So that's not a guaranteed right of return. It's a qualified right of return, isn't it?
Yeah, something appears to have been inserted to make this less robust than the politicians would have intended. I don't quite know how that got in there, but it's certainly not our view. Our view was that the right to return was unconditional.
Right. Well, looking at it now, do you accept that Mr. Devine might have had a point about?
He might have had a point. I don't think this is a fascist decant policy, but it's loosely worded and it conflicts with the local plan and it conflicts with the views of members.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Finally, Mr. Paget-Brown, we've been through quite a lot of evidence over the last day or so, and I'm going to ask you the question that I ask a number of witnesses in senior positions who come and assist us. Looking back on it, is there anything now that you would have done differently in your post as deputy leader or leader at the time?
Well, I do think about that an awful lot, as you can imagine, since 2017. I think I would be very nervous now of high-rise developments in general and refurbishments in particular. There are clearly a number of issues which are difficult or potentially difficult. I think high-rise buildings, anyway, quite apart from the architecture, the design, the refurbishment, are not always the happiest places to live. You can be very lonely, very isolated. There are all sorts of issues when you do live in a high-rise flat. So I don't think necessarily they're the best way forward for the future. I think now I would favour mansion blocks, which do exist in a large part of Kensington and Chelsea, and I think that would be a better model for future housing. I think also I would think hard about the phrase arm's length management organisation. It does seem that the phrase arm's length itself is quite vague and open to different interpretations. And it seemed to me the happy idea in the 1990s that you might devolve power hasn't really meant that. It really has meant that councils should be running housing directly. And maybe that's something else that needed to change. I'm very sorry I didn't have more influence with the government of the day at the time or just after the fire. We heard in one of the submissions to this, the opening statements to this module, that an email had been sent to the Cabinet Secretary saying this needed to be seen as a local failure, otherwise it would be seen as a systemic failure. And it seems to me, from what I've heard and read, that and with what we've seen, that this is a systemic failure. This material is in widespread use everywhere. I was very proud to be leader of Kensington and Chelsea. I'm desperately sorry for everybody who was in the tower on the morning of the 14th of June. I will never forget what I saw. It was utterly, utterly terrible. The memorial to those who lost their lives and lost everything and have had their lives ruined must be that the work that this inquiry is doing to find out what really happened can never happen again, and that must be the memorial to those that lost their lives, and I'm so sorry for all of them.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Paget-Brown, it only remains for me to thank you for coming here and assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful to you. Thank you.
Yes, and it's right that I should thank you as well, Mr. Paget-Brown, on behalf of all the members of the panel for your coming here to give your evidence. We always find it very helpful to hear from those who are directly involved in these events, and there's no exception in your case. It's been very helpful to hear your evidence, so thank you very much for coming to give it to us.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Millett, we have another witness.
We have another witness, another councillor, and Mr. Kinnear will be taking his evidence.
Right.
So we may need the normal...
We'll need a short break
short break.
while arrangements are made.
Yes, thank you.
And maybe you can ask the usher to come and get us when they have been made.
Certainly, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Kinnear. Now you're going to call the next witness.
Sir, yes. Could I call Quentin Marshall?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Marshall.
Good morning.
I understand you're going to take the oath.
I am indeed.
Right, so you should have a testament there. Could you take it in your right hand, please, and repeat the words on the screen?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, and do sit down and make yourself comfortable. Right. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. First of all, would you please confirm your name for the record?
Quentin Marshall.
Thank you for coming to give evidence today. As some preliminary notes, if at any time during evidence you require a break, please say so. Secondly, would you please keep your voice up so that the transcriber can capture everything you say? Thirdly and finally, please don't nod or shake your head in response to an answer. Please say yes or no as the question demands so the transcriber can carefully record that for you. Now, you have provided 3 statements. The first statement is dated the 29th of October 2018, RBK 000 33 744. And that should come up on the screen. There's a second statement provided to the Metropolitan Police dated the 17th of September 2019, which is at Met 000 64987. And finally, you provided a second statement to the inquiry dated the 27th of September 2019, which is at RBK 000 54431. Have you read each of those statements recently?
Yes.
Can you confirm that the contents of each are true?
Yes.
And before coming to give evidence today, have you discussed your evidence with anyone?
No.
Thank you. Now, the questioning today will focus on your role as chairman of the Housing, Property and Scrutiny Committee. And the first matters I'd like to discuss with you are the principles of good scrutiny. Now, can we look at a document called Delivering Good Governance in Local Government, Guidance Notes for English Authorities, published by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and that can be found at INQ 000 14671. And there's the frontispiece, and if we can go to page 90 of that document and paragraph there we go. And if we can look at paragraph 6.9, which set out there the 4 core principles of good scrutiny. First, which is provides critical friend challenge to executive policymakers and decision takers, enables the voice and concerns of the public, is carried out by independent-minded councillors who lead and own the process, and drives improvement in public services. Would you agree with those 4 core principles?
Yes.
And would you say that you consistently exercise them during your time on the Housing, Property and Scrutiny Committee?
Yes, although I think in relation to the second one, during my time, we were inwardly focused rather than externally focused, and that's something that's changed subsequently, which I think is a good thing.
And what do you mean by the phrase inwardly focused in contrast to outwardly so?
Most of our time was spent talking to officers and other official bodies, such as the TMO, rather than talking to residents, citizens in the borough.
And was it the fire that prompted the change?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, can I first of all turn to HPSC procedure? And can we begin by looking at the first document you exhibited to your first witness statement? And that can be found at RBK 000 33748/2. And we see there Article 6.01 of the RBKC Constitution, which sets out the general powers of the scrutiny committees. And it says there, under the heading General Duties, scrutiny committees are empowered to 1. Review and scrutinise decisions made or actions taken in connection with the discharge of any of the council's functions.
2, recommend and report to the full council, including committees of the council, or the executive, including advisory groups, in connection with the discharge of any of the council's functions. 3, consider any matter affecting the Royal Borough or its inhabitants. 4, exercise the right to call in for reconsideration decisions made but not yet implemented by the executive. And 5, hold an inquiry into a matter which has been the subject of a report from the monitoring officer or the chief finance officer. Now, if I could ask us to go to 6.03, which is over the page. We see there to scrutinise the provision, planning, management and performance of all housing services, any property, there we go, any partnerships associated with the delivery of housing, social housing regeneration and the housing regeneration programme, supporting people's services, the tenant management organisation at 5, 6, housing strategy, housing stock finance and development, and 7thly, corporate asset management. Now, looking at those extracts of the Constitution, would you agree that the committee's role included review and scrutiny of, first of all, decisions made in connection with the discharge of any of the council's functions?
Yes, to the extent that they were within the areas that that committee had oversight over.
Yeah. And so in relation to housing, it would also include considering any matter affecting RBKC or its inhabitants?
Yes.
And ditto provision, planning, management, performance of all housing services?
Yes.
And the TMO?
Yes.
And that review and scrutiny would have included the safety, and in particular the fire safety of RBKC residents. Would that be right?
Not explicitly, but implicitly, yes.
TMO residents in particular?
Yes.
And the committee had no decision-making power, but could inquire, discuss and question actions of the Cabinet?
That's correct.
Officers?
Of the Cabinet, there was some uncertainty because of the existence of a committee, a scrutiny committee that had a role in relation to the Cabinet.
But in relation to housing?
In relation to housing, yes. Then the Housing Committee would have scrutinised matters in relation to housing.
And you could question RBKC officers in relation to housing matters?
Yes, we could.
And the TMO as well?
Yes, although it was uncertain in retrospect what formal power we had over the TMO. In practice, yes, we had the power to scrutinise the TMO.
And a necessary limitation on the exercise of that function would be the adequacy of the information you're provided with. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Now, if we can turn to paragraph 11 of your first witness statement, which is at RBK 000333744, internal page 2. We see that at the bottom of the page you say this, and I quote, "If the committee disagreed with a cabinet member or officers, it could not take further action other than to continue to raise the matter in public at its meetings. The scrutiny process could be frustrating because we were often given information or told about something after the event. We were reliant on officers giving us comprehensive information on the activities in their departments and had almost no independent support. Our ability to scrutinise was also constrained by the large number of matters within our purview, which had to be covered in 6 meetings a year, typically of 2 hours length each. This high-level approach is apparent in the minutes." Now, you mentioned there the frustration you felt with the process, as you were often told things after the event. Was that a frustration you experienced throughout your time as chair of the committee?
Yes, although I would say towards the end it improved.
And was an element in causing that frustration the provision of inadequate or insufficient information by the TMO to you?
Not specifically the TMO. I'm more thinking about the officers through which information from the TMO came as well.
So inadequacy, insufficiency of information provided by the likes of Laura Johnson?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you do to improve the situation and to alleviate your frustration?
I raised this frequently at the scrutiny steering group, and I also had frequent conversations with officers about it.
You said towards the end it improved. Was that a result of the actions you've just outlined?
Yes.
And did any other, or put this differently, did the frustrations you felt resonate with other scrutiny chairs?
To a lesser extent. I think I was more vociferous about this than others.
Did you raise the concern about the adequacy of the information you received with Ms Johnson herself directly?
I'm trying to think about adequacy of information. Probably yes, but I can't think of a specific example.
Did you raise it with any other member of the Housing Department directly?
No. All my communications would have been with Ms Johnson as head of the department, which was the protocol in force.
You refer to the Scrutiny Committee's ability to refer an issue to a working group at paragraph 18 of your witness statement, and for reference it's over the page at page 4. Now, can you help us with the circumstances in which an issue would be referred to a working group for consideration?
So typically each year we would select 1, 2 or possibly 3 matters for further investigation. I would invite committee members to suggest things that they thought were interesting, which they wanted to go and do some more work on. That would be discussed at full committee and agreed at full committee.
And can you assist the panel, first of all, of the type of issue that would be the subject of a working group, and then the level of detail into which you'd examine that particular issue?
It could be very varied, considering our brief covered not just housing but also property. Typically, we tried to do one on each side of our subject matters, so one on housing-related matter, one on a property-related matter.
Is that per year?
Per year, yes. Each working group might have had 3, 4 or 5 members to it. Those members would meet as many times as they needed to. I would imagine typically 3 or 4 times for an hour or 2, and they would be assisted by officers to pursue their lines of inquiry on whatever the subject matter would have been.
Now, in terms of the individuals who would appear before you, would the cabinet member with the housing and property portfolio attend before you?
To a working group or to the committee?
The committee generally.
To the committee, normally, yes.
And would you usually have the 2 lead RBKC officers, so the lead for housing, the lead for property?
Yes, we would.
And so that meant that Laura Johnson would routinely attend your meetings?
Yes, she would have done.
Now, you say at paragraph 21 of your first statement, and we can turn over the page to it, it's page 5, that you were uncertain, and this picks up a point you made some moments ago, whether TMO employees had a formal obligation to appear before the Scrutiny Committee. Looked at somewhat differently, did you ever experience a problem with TMO employees attending to answer your questions?
No, hence my thought that I don't know whether explicitly they were required to do so, because they always did.
So it wasn't a practical problem?
It wasn't a practical problem.
Thank you. Now, if we look at paragraph 22 of your witness statement, which is up there on the screen, you say this, and I quote, "As chairman, I would have meetings with senior council officers in order to discuss the agenda for committee meetings. As a result, I engage with the senior officers more than the average member. I would discuss the practicalities of how a matter would be addressed, who would address it, in which order, and for how long. Those meetings were informal, via telephone, or face-to-face." Were those meetings minuted or in any way recorded?
I don't believe so.
Would you set the agenda for these meetings, or would there invariably be no agenda?
The agenda would be setting the agenda for the committee meeting. So the format of the meeting would normally be that the officers would say, these are the things that are going on, and these are the things that we think should be on the agenda. And if there was anything else that I thought needed to be added, I would suggest that. And I would seek to understand a little bit about what the issues that they were suggesting should appear are. So I was prepared.
Now, can I turn to the FRA programme, which you deal with, or start to deal with at paragraph 27 of the witness statement in front of us, and that can be found at page 6. And you say there at the bottom of that page this, and I quote, "Whilst the HPSC had no direct involvement in fire safety in undertaking its work, it took fire safety seriously. One of the issues that gained traction was ensuring fire regulation compliant leaseholder doors." Now, you say that the committee had no direct involvement in fire safety, but would you agree that the committee was charged with reviewing and scrutinising the approach taken by both the council and the TMO to fire safety in relation to housing?
Not specifically, but yes, in the sense that fire safety was a very important feature of housing policy.
Now, Mr. Paget-Brown said in evidence this morning, page 7 of the transcript, that it was for the HPSC to make sure that the TMO was complying with FRAs and fire risk assessments. Would you agree with that summary?
No, I wouldn't. I think it would have been for officers to ensure that the TMO was complying, and it would be for us to check that officers were doing that and that the results of those were adequate. So we wouldn't have had a direct responsibility to check it.
Now, looking at paragraph 28 of your witness statement, just over the page at page 7, you refer there to a progress report prepared for the committee meeting on the 20th of January 2011. Now, that report was a follow-up to an earlier one provided in March 2010. Can we look first at the minutes of what appears to have been the Housing, Environmental, Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee on the 15th of March 2010, which is at RBK 000 52573. Now we can see there that you attended the meeting, is that right?
That's correct.
And if we could turn to page 2 of these minutes and item A6 at the bottom of the page, we see there under the heading LGA report, so that'd be Local Government Association, extinguishing the risk, a councillor's guide to fire safety. And item A6 says this, and I quote, Ms Janice Ray, TMO Health and Safety Advisor, was present to amplify the main points of the report, with close liaison with the London Fire Brigade throughout and the assistance of a specialist fire risk assessment consultant. A fire risk assessment programme had been drawn up. The works to the high-risk blocks were now virtually complete. Attention was now turning to medium-risk assessments. And if we turn over the page, the Chief Housing Officer confirmed that registered providers in the Royal Borough had been surveyed following the very serious fire in Southwark in July 2009. All the major registered providers had responded and further details could be provided to members on request. The Head of Service Residential Operations, Mr Key, confirmed that a robust inspection scheme, with enforcement if necessary, covered private rental properties in the borough. So would it be right to take it that you were first made aware of the fire risk assessment programme at this meeting in March 2010?
I believe so from reading this. I had been on the committee prior to being the chairman, so I'm not certain now whether there'd been mention of this prior to this date.
Presumably, in your capacity as a member and later chair of the committee, you were aware of the Lacknell House fire?
Yes, that had come up in the papers we received.
Now, Janice Ray's report addresses guidance that had been sent specifically to councillors to help them in discharge of their fire safety duties. Can we now turn to that guidance, which is at TMO 100-37396? I'll just give you the opportunity just to have a quick look at that to familiarise yourself with it. Have you seen that document before?
I don't recall seeing it.
At all?
At all, I don't recall seeing it. I might have done, but as of today, I can't remember it.
Now, can we look at the first page and the top of the right-hand column, which says this, and I quote, "This guide is for leading councillors. Whether you are a leader or deputy leader, housing portfolio holder, regulatory services portfolio holder, fire authority member, or county fire service portfolio holder, overview and scrutiny committee member, or ALMO board member. It will give you the information you need to be confident that your authority is doing all it can to comply with the law, enforce the law, and safeguard people in their own homes. If things were to go wrong, you would need to be able to show that your authority systems can withstand intense scrutiny." Now, you were the Vice Chair of Scrutiny in March 2010, I think, and then Chair from October 2010. This guidance was clearly relevant to the exercise of your duties as a scrutineering officer, a member.
Yes, no, I think that's correct.
Now, can we look on the second page and roughly 1/3 down the left-hand column, and under the subtitle Action, the text says this, and I quote, "Every multi-occupied building must have a risk assessment that identifies the things that might cause a fire, what risks a fire might present and to whom, the action you are going to take and the information you will give to people. One size will not fit all, and you will need to make sure that the person doing the risk assessments on your behalf is competent. This is not the duty of the fire authority. The risk assessment is a live document and will need to be kept under review. Having an action plan will help you prioritise activity and resources, and you'll need to monitor the action plan." Now, that guide suggests that councillors had a responsibility to check the following, and I want to see whether you agree with this, that fire risk assessments were being carried out. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
That the fire risk assessor was competent?
Yes.
That action plans arising from risk assessments were being monitored?
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Now, following that paragraph, there's further text, which starts with the words, "There are three important issues to think about." And if that, we could go to that, thank you. And the text says this, and I quote, "The state of fire precautions in your housing stock, day-to-day management of communal areas, keeping tenants and leaseholders informed. In a fire, people do not usually die from the fire itself, but from toxic smoke. So keeping fire precautions such as fire doors and smoke alarms in good repair is essential. Your repairs policy should identify fire safety as a priority. Building works may affect fire precautions, and in some cases, the building regulations require contractors to tell you if the fire safety in the block has changed as a result of their work. You need to make sure this is happening with systems in place and responsibility clear for the different aspects of fire precautions in the building." Now, that paragraph suggests that councillors should ensure the following. First, that repairs policy identifies fire safety as a priority. Would you agree with that proposition?
Yes, I do, but I'd like to add, I think there are different layers between us ensuring that our officers were taking these issues seriously and us actually, particularly as scrutiny members, being the people implementing it, because that I don't consider was our role.
Would you agree that in your capacity as a scrutinising member that you had to see whether systems were in place with a responsibility clear for different aspects of fire precautions, or would you see that as someone else's function?
So again, I think it would have been our responsibility to check that these matters were being taken seriously and being implemented in turn by officers and the TMO.
As one of your scrutiny functions, did you ever have cause to scrutinise the TMO's repairs policy?
I believe we might have done, but I can't be certain.
Why do you think you might have done? Was it prompted by any particular concern that you can now remember?
I believe, I'm just trying to rack my mind, I believe there was a working group, or there was some investigation around repairs in relation to voids.
And that's what prompted?
Yes, I think so.
And was your consideration focused on that particular discrete topic of voids?
Yes, I think it was. My memory on this is not very accurate or very clear.
Now, earlier you said that you didn't recall seeing this guidance before. From what source did you seek advice as to what were the relevant fire duties that you were scrutinising performance of?
I don't think I ever explicitly asked about fire duties.
Was there anything you inquired about which could have been taken to be implicit inquiry about the extent of fire safety duties and the performance you were scrutinising?
Well, fire safety arose over the course of the years when I was chairing the committee, and I think through that process, I felt that we were quite active actually in asking about fire-related issues. Whenever we spotted something, particularly around fire doors, that suggested that it was of concern, we definitely followed up frequently.
But from what you say, is it fair to say this, that you never actively sought out understanding of what the nature and extent of the fire safety duties were, performance of which you were scrutinising?
No, I think that's true.
Thank you. Now, going back to the text, the next paragraph says this, and it starts with the words, "the information you give your residents." And if we could go to that, please. The information you give your residents about how to keep safe in their homes, their responsibilities and what to do in a fire could save lives. Your residents may not all have English as a first language or be able to understand written materials easily, so the information must be in an understandable form. Giving a leaflet when a new resident moves in is not enough. Regular updates should be given, particularly when changes occur following refurbishment, for example. Tenants and residents associations may be able to help with this. Would you agree with the proposition that that paragraph gives straightforward, comprehensible advice about the importance of informing residents?
Yes, I would.
The next paragraph is under the title Confidence, and on the right, and it's, as you see, it's on the right-hand side of this page, and the text says this, and I quote, There are no prizes for good fire safety management, but the penalties are severe. You will only be confident if you regularly measure and keep on top of your performance on fire safety. This can be evidenced through local indicators developed for your area, such as the number of risk assessments carried out, reduction in fires, response time to fire safety repairs, and feedback from resident surveys. Would you agree again that that provides comprehensible, straightforward advice to councillors discharging scrutiny functions?
No, I'm not sure I would. I think there's a multi-tier system in place, or that was in place. We had the TMO acting as a manager of the building stock. We had officers in turn supervising the contract between the council and the TMO. We had executive councillors exercising decision-taking powers. And then you had scrutiny one stage even further removed from this. So I think our role was to be assured that the other layers beneath us were conducting all the things that this document was recommending. I don't think it would have been for us to actually be the people doing these activities.
I'm not suggesting that it is for you to do those activities. This document was prepared to assist those members who are exercising scrutiny functions so that you knew what you were scrutinising. And my question to you is, would you accept that the advice set out in the paragraph under the heading confidence provides straightforward, comprehensible information as to what steps should be taken to discharge provision of information obligations to residents?
Yes, sorry, on that, absolutely, I agree.
Can we now turn back to the minutes of the meeting of the 15th of March 2010, which are RBKC 000-52573/3. And you'll see there the second paragraph from the top of the page starts with the words, "at the suggestion of the chairman," and I quote, "In view of the gravity of councillors' duties in this area," so fire safety, "it was agreed that there would be a follow-up report to the committee in 6 to 9 months. This report should focus on identifying progress made to address the recommendations made in the fire risk assessments action plans, in particular progress with the high and medium priority actions." Now, it's clear that the committee was aware, as a consequence of the above guidance, of the gravity of councillors' duties with regards to fire safety. Would you agree with that proposition?
Yes.
And there was a need to check progress with the actions arising out of fire risk assessments plans. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And that was a continuing obligation.
Yes.
Now, can we look at the report prepared for the January 2011 meeting that you referred to in your witness statement of paragraph 28? And we can find that report at RBK 000-29881. And if we look at paragraph 2.1 at the bottom of the page, it says this: the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005 came into force in October 2006 and introduced requirements for, quotes, responsible persons, close quotes, i.e. those in control of premises such as landlords and managing agents, to carry out fire risk assessments and also to ensure that there are adequate fire precautions to ensure the safety of all persons legally on the premises. Now, as a result of that report, is it right to say that you were aware, first of all, of the need to carry out fire risk assessments?
Yes.
And to ensure that adequate fire precautions were in place to ensure safety?
Yes.
And you were aware also that those requirements were regulatory obligations. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And can we turn over the page and look at paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2? We see there under the heading Approach to Fire Risk Assessments in RBKC Housing Stock, 3.1 says, and I quote, "To ensure that the approach is carrying out fire risk assessments across the Council's housing stock was fully compliant with the legislation, KC, TMO and RBKC negotiated with the London Fire Brigade to agree the approach, the programme and the timescales for carrying out both the assessments and any works identified by them as necessary for compliance." 3.2, the LFB confirmed that they considered a 3-year timescale commencing July 2009 for completion of all fire risk assessments, and a 5-year timescale also commencing in July 2009 for completion of all works, all necessary works to be reasonable. Now, Would you agree that those paragraphs, in particular the latter, is plain, that it was a 3-year timescale for completion of FRAs and a 5-year timescale for completion of all necessary works?
Yes.
Was anything put in place or recommended by your committee to check the progress of this programme so that it was on target for completion by July 2014?
I don't believe so outside the regular reports we received.
Would you have put in place particular arrangements to scrutinise compliance with programmes?
You mean generically or in relation to this specific?
Generically, or in the past, had you?
I think only in relation to fire doors.
And is that the leaseholder issue you referred to earlier on in your evidence?
Yes.
Did you raise for consideration whether compliance with fire risk assessments, completing actions arising out of FRAs, ought to have been the subject of a key performance indicator?
No, I don't believe I did.
Was there any consideration of whether a working group ought to have been established to monitor progress of FRAs and the programme that was discussed here at paragraph 3.2?
No committee member or myself suggested that.
So, mindful of the time, that's a convenient place to...
Is that a good point?
It is, sir.
Right. Well, in that case, Mr. Marshall, I think we should stop so that we can all get some lunch. We'll resume at 2:00, please. And I have to ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. All right? Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher, then, please. Thank you. 2:00, then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Yep.